And welcome to video 2 of 4 for the detested guitar sound videos. I was very surprised actually because after I put out the rhythm tone video last week, I got a lot of people both publicly and in messages being like, oh wow, I can't wait for the lead tone video. And so that actually made it pretty easy for me because I was deciding which video to do next, and I guess that was the decision. So here we are, lead tone for the new record. This is it, what you're looking at here. So basically this was a really cool thing for me because I hadn't made a record in 10 years and I sure as hell wasn't gigging because I was busy working on other records for other people and whatnot. So this gave me an opportunity to kind of reinvent a rig inside the computer and just really have fun with it. And for the most part, that's exactly what I did. And it's a surprisingly simple setup, as you'll see. From left to right, clockwise. As I had talked about in the first video, there was this dude that makes these amp simulator plugins, and I was using one of his original designs for the rhythm tone on the album. But this time around, I'm actually using one of the ones that he made, which is based off of a real amp, and as you might be able to tell visually, it is based on the Bogner Ecstasy, which is a favorite amp of mine, especially for, you know, lead and mid-gain and kind of crunch and all that stuff in between. It's a beautiful sounding amp. Anyone who's played that will pretty much say the same thing. So I use the blue channel for the leads. I think that's pretty much everybody's favorite channel in real life for the Ecstasy too. I mean, anybody that I ask would usually say that, and I definitely dig it a lot. And I was kind of worried originally that the blue channel wouldn't have enough gain, you know, for this particular application. But one of the cool things about this simulator plugin is it has this boost control, which I most certainly turned on, and has this 3-position bright switch, so I went to the brightest of the settings on here. And I actually made the original sound through the diesel cabinet in the wall of sound, which is the same one that I used for the rhythm sound. But after kind of messing with it for a bit, I felt like it really wasn't working out as well as it could work out. And so I tested out a bunch of different cabs, and then it occurred to me, in my real-life travails as a producer and an engineer, I really liked using the 212 size cabinets for capturing lead guitar. And so I went into all the cabinets within Wall of Sound and tested all the different 212s, and I found one that I liked. And it says on the plugin, you'll see it says 2x12 Eddy. So I was wondering, like, what the hell does that mean? And so it turns out that the 2x12 Eddy in the Torpedo Wall of Sound plugin is actually supposed to be the two 12-inch speakers which make up the bottom half of a PV 5150 combo, which I would have never thought to do in real life. So, you know, yay for digital and yay for experimenting, I guess. And this was a surprisingly easy thing. I mean, I got the sound pretty much based around just using 157 in the Wall of Sound, and that was it, really. I jammed on it for quite a bit, and the only tweak I made as far as EQ or anything post was just a 1 dB dip at 800 Hertz, which you can see the EQ section of Wall of Sound is turned on. There was another mic that I was going to use on the back, because sometimes I like to do that, especially if a 212 is an open or semi-open back, but I tried messing with that here in the computer. Didn't quite work the way that I wanted it to, so I just got rid of it. And then under the guitar amp and speaker plugins, you will see the Soundtoys Little Micro Shift, which is a plugin that basically has 3 presets which emulate kind of the best of the older Eventide units, doing things like stereo width and detuning and pitch shifting, things like that. And it's a really great sounding little thing. The actual full-blown Microshift plugin did come out about 3/4 of the way into this record, but since all I needed were these 2 parameters, I just stuck with the little Microshift because that's literally all I needed for the lead sound. And you'll see that here it has a 7% wet mix, very little, just a little bit of widening and deepening, and I used the 3rd of the 3 preset algorithms because that one just sounds the most even and kind of the biggest and, you know, just the nicest to me. And then after that, you'll notice I did kind of the noob thing, and I put a delay right on the audio track I was using it on, as opposed to setting up its own aux bus and just, you know, using a send to that. But the truth is, you know, my creative flow in Logic, I really didn't want to be hindered at all by, setting up mixes and setting up groups and all that stuff. So I just went like this and did it this way, and that's why you can see on the center of that delay, it has a 17% wet mix, very little. And one of the things that I really like to do with delays, not just in my own music, but on other mixes, is I usually like to flip the phase on one side of the stereo delay, because in the repeats of the delay, it creates a really neat effect where it kind of goes around and behind your head, sort of. It's a neat thing. So this is exactly what I recorded all the leads on the record with. When it was time to go to Pro Tools, I obviously took off the micro shift and the stereo delay and then replicated those later in Pro Tools during the mix. So let's take a listen to the original audio from Logic once more, and then I'm going to show you what happened in Pro Tools. As you can see now, we have entered Pro Tools, and basically what you're seeing here is all the effects and mix processing, etc., that followed the amped guitar sound that you heard and saw the plugins for in Logic. So I'm going to go through this from left to right, like I usually do, and hopefully this doesn't confuse anybody too much. So what I did here, first of all, is I took a screenshot of this, but I took a screenshot of it during playback, so you can see sort of gain reductions and just, other things like that, where in the frequency range things are being acted on, etc. Anyway, so let's talk. So the micro shift is applied here in the same exact way it was applied in Logic. As I said, I'm recreating the effects I had. In this particular song, it looks like I ended up with, I believe it says 21.9% wet on the micro shift with the same algorithm. And the topic of the wet-dry mix on the microshift for leads is kind of an interesting one for this record, because that changes on every single song, on every single track that uses it throughout the song sometimes. That is one of the many parameters during the mix that I actually automated to go up and down in certain parts. Like, it's pretty audible too, because you can hear, like, certain parts of the record, it's a much more center-focused guitar sound for solos, and then other ones it's kind of much wider and sort of more chorused, and that is literally all the work of that plugin and that mix knob being automated up and down. So to the right of that, you're going to see the Sonox Oxford Suppressor, which is basically a very fancy, extremely controllable frequency-based compressor that functions on one range of bands or one band by itself. And this is something that gets used quite a lot in all my mixes for everybody, not just my stuff. On rhythm guitar, I would have used it for palm mutes. On bass, I might have used it for some woof. And here, what it's doing is it's basically just dynamically kind of pulling down anything from about 418 hertz down on the lead guitar. And the reason it's doing that mostly is because that's just kind of information that for the lead guitar can be affected and attenuated, because once it's in the mix with this wall of heavy rhythm and stuff, it's actually a lot easier to hear things when there's not as much overlap in that range. And then you'll see after that, further to the right, is the Sonox Oxford EQ, and that's actually the entire amount of EQ I used on lead guitar for the entire thing. That's it. A pretty steep filter, high-pass filter at around 100, and there's just this resonant point at about 5.6K that came up in a few spots on the record that I wanted to just kind of get rid of, and that's it there. And then after that, in the lower left-hand corner, you will see the Waves C6, which is basically the same compressor as the C4 multiband compressor, but this one adds 2 parametric bands as opposed to just 4 crossover bands. So that means I can really hone in specifically on one frequency and just sort of attenuate with that center frequency as the anchor, versus having a range of frequencies be the anchor for the middle 4 bands that you see. And the purpose of the C6 compressor in my mixes, 99.9% of the time, is on solo instruments or a solo vocal, because what it does is, yes, it's a compressor, but it's compressed the signal based on listening to all the different bands and things that I tell it to listen to. So it's not just taking, one sonic trigger, like from the mid-range of a vocal or something, and then compressing the entire thing like a normal compressor. It is literally applying different compression amounts to each of the parts of the frequency spectrum of that track. And that allows it to kind of stay very much dynamically smooth, and it just sort of keeps it vital and audible in the mix without spiking or having to be, automated up too high and then way too low, etc., etc. Now, this is the one thing different from the original guitar sound in Logic. To the right of the C6, you're seeing the Moog analog delay, and this is a delay that I mostly just use for color because the repeats are real juicy and funky sounding, and they modulate quite a bit, and I really like how it sounds, both the hardware and the software. So you don't really hear this that much in the mix, especially because most of the content of that delay hits in the center. So it's kind of just like a thickening, fattening sort of affair with the lead guitar and really anything that gets sent to it. But to the right of that, you will see the actual delay that's doing the audible repeats, which is set almost exactly how it was set in Logic, except one of the sides, I think in this one, is set for a half note and the other is a quarter note, whereas in Logic, both of them were quarter note. But just as I did it in Logic and just as I do it in general, I did flip the phase of one of the channels again, for the effect that we had talked about previously. Now, the EQ that you're seeing below that delay plugin is not an EQ that was on the lead guitar track itself. It's actually an EQ that was on the delay of that guitar track, because as with the signal, of the dry lead guitar had its own EQ and its own resonance points that I was taking care of, I wanted to sort of make sure definitively that the delays didn't have any of the same problems, especially considering they would keep repeating and feeding back, and it could potentially cause a lot of masking problems in the mix if that wasn't attended to. So that's it, really. I mean, sonically, the sound really doesn't change. There's been nothing super drastic as far as EQ changes or anything like that, and, the delay and the microshift effect were all replicated here, just as they were in Logic, and this time I, didn't do it the new way. I actually set up the buses and, did all that stuff like I would, for any actual mix that I was doing. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the version of this solo from the Logic session, and then right after that, I'm going to play the new version of it as it appears in the actual mix for this song in Pro Tools. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know it was kind of a lengthy one, but if you stuck around, then at some point you will probably receive a cookie or a card in the mail that says thank you.